Brainlord was developed by Produce and published by Enix. It was released in North America in 1994, where it no doubt sat on the shelves of Toys R Us until the end of time. You know, with some games, I really sit back and I wonder why they never got their due. They had what it took, but they just never got that moment in the sun. Why didn't they get their chance to become the next Chrono Trigger, Call of Duty, or Zelda? When it comes to Brainlord, I don't really have to wonder that much. Brainlord is an incredibly difficult game, but not in that Contra one mistake and you're dead type of difficulty. It's more of a slow attrition difficulty, where the game slowly wears you out over time with an almost constant barrage of monsters and puzzles. You end up feeling a bit like that famous I Love Lucy skit on the assembly line, where stuff just keeps coming down the conveyor belt and they're eventually throwing it everywhere. A good example of the difficulty is actually just the first tower of the game, which sort of works like a tutorial for the rest of the game. It becomes very difficult very quickly. By any standard, even the first dungeon is absolutely huge. It's almost overpoweringly so. The combat itself, while not actually hard, is difficult because the monsters literally keep respawning and attacking you constantly. Even if you go slightly off screen, they're instantly back. And then they start throwing floor spikes at you, jumping puzzles, and then there's the ball puzzles. The first couple puzzles seem quite simplistic and almost childish, and they're there just to familiarize you with but soon you end up with really complex puzzles. Sometimes the puzzle requires you to even try things you didn't know you could even do in the game. Mostly because the game never showed you it was possible and sort of assumed you would know. The first dungeon isn't a great place for unorthodox puzzles. Then the orange balls show up. Do you think you're good at games? These orange balls are going to put you in your place. I can promise you right now that you've never had so many problems with orange balls in your entire life. Except for maybe that balls game. What, you don't remember balls? Maybe I should do a video on that sometime. No! I have to be strong! Admittedly, the puzzles really do add an interesting challenge to the game, but when you think back to when it was released, a lot of people didn't have the internet or any way of finding out a solution for a problem if they got stuck on it. And I can imagine it would be really frustrating to get stuck in a game right at the start. And it's not hard to also imagine that the odd controller was thrown at the TV just because of this game. I'm doing some deep thoughts about this fairly unpopular Super Nintendo game, instead of, say, science, philosophy, or trying to find true love. I realized what I really like about this game, and what actually makes it worth playing, even though it can be a very frustrating game, is that it's actually also very helpful to the player. It's a tough, unforgiving game. But for every challenge it gives the player, it also gives you something for dealing with that challenge. And it doesn't solve the challenge just by making it go away. Like, for instance, if you're immune to fire, when before you were in a fire environment that was constantly damaging you. It provides you the tool for dealing with the challenge, but it still leaves it up to you to take advantage of it and use it properly. And I really like that. One challenge that the game has discussed previously is monsters are constantly attacking the player, and they seem to respawn almost non-stop. But the game also gives you a variety of really useful weapons, such as a boomerang that has a rapid attack, a bow and arrow that has really good range, or a sword with a really long swipe arc that really helps you kill the monsters quickly. And they were upgraded as the game progresses. On a side note, the axe really sucks. And also, to deal with the endless monster horde of games, you're given a variety of magical abilities that work kind of like a charge attack. And they also provide these fairies that work kind of like automated minions with different powers, who actually really help in a fight, and they can make a real difference in this challenging game. You end up fighting bosses with really high hit points, and there's long drawn out fights, but the game also is very generous with inventory room, and they give you multiple healing items that really help you last through the fight. The dungeons in this game are absolutely massive, and as mentioned previously, The first dungeon is huge and it can take several hours to beat by itself. But in the same dungeon, you run into a really nice character who gives you these X-ray glasses that bring up fairly large, detailed maps. Especially for a Super Nintendo game, and you have to consider back then, maps in-game weren't really a thing. As the dungeons keep getting bigger in this game, the in-map system is actually a real godsend. I mean, look at this confusing mess. One final example of how the game kind of gives and takes away is it gives you an incredible amount of keys and locked doors in the game, but it also gives you descriptions in the keys so you sort of know where to use them. Despite my complaining, I actually find myself really liking this game, and I think it's because it has that sort of good versus evil game design that it does to the player. I really like this design choice. I feel it's almost like the game had two designers that were having some sort of fight or rivalry between each other. So the one designer goes like, I'm going to make this dungeon incredibly, impossibly hard and large. And the other designer goes, well, I'm going to put a merchant in the middle of it. And the other designer is like, well, he's only going to sell armor that you don't even need. And then the other guy's kind of like, oh yeah, well, maybe you'll find better armor anyway. And it feels like you're almost stuck between the middle of these two designers. And it's actually kind of a lot of fun. And the game does this a lot. But it never really falls into that design trap of where something exists solely for the purpose of creating an artificial challenge. Which, although I love Zelda, it does do that sometimes. Like you need to, say, find a hammer to break a block that's in your way, but the block's only there to be in your way. So that's why you have to get the hammer. Maybe the game does do this a little bit, but it's a lot less obvious. Another aspect I really like about this game is you don't actually explore all the world alone. At the start of the game, you meet several other people who end up traveling the dungeons with you. Now, the game doesn't really explain if you're your friends, villagers, or other adventurers, but they're always kind of seen running around the dungeon at the same time you are. Sometimes they even give you useful hints, they complain about the dungeon, or they can even help with various puzzles. At one point, one even decides to heal you and start selling you health items in the second dungeon, and it's really useful. Now, why didn't he start doing it in the first dungeon? I don't know. I guess he's a jerk. I actually found it kind of endearing, and I happen to always like games where you don't feel like you're the only adventurer in the whole world. It's kind of nice to know that there's another hero out there taking a little bit of the pressure off, even if in the game they don't really do that much. Occasionally your friends in the game even screw you over, like they steal your reward after fighting a boss, even though all you did was try to help them through the level. It's a surprisingly accurate recreation of a real friendship. But I suppose compared to the average NPC in an RPG game, they're actually being pretty helpful. The game also makes a few other interesting design decisions, like your character doesn't have levels exactly, he gets more permanent health boosts from hearts that he finds, and the improvement to the character is more by upgrading your equipment. The game is a very money-based game, and although the choices are kind of interesting, I wouldn't say either one of them really moves the needle when it comes to game design. The fairies take place of magic in this game, and they're kind of automated little creatures that float around and help you, and they can also level up themselves and improve. And while they do have various levels of usefulness, I mean, I love that Rage Fairy. He's a lot of fun. I mean, look at that little guy. He's floating around, that little jerk, and he's attacking people. He's got a lot of panache. But some of the other ones are they leave a little bit to be desired. Although that Rage Fairy, you know, I would actually throw out that he's one of the most useful NPC helpers that you get during this video game era. Or maybe even now. I mean, does anyone remember this guy? I don't remember him doing anything except triggering an alarm and complaining about being a robot. As you might know, I have a personal belief that games really only need to excel at one thing to be a good game. When it comes to Brainlord, the defining characteristic of the game is that it's a fair game, and it doesn't cheap-ass you, but it doesn't give you a lot of handouts either. It'll give you the tools to get the job done, if you're capable. And I really respect that. Not a lot of games do that. Sometimes, like a roguelike game, You just can't win no matter what. It just doesn't give you the right stuff in that round. Other times it overhelps, it over-explains. Brainlord, it really hits that sweet spot. And I feel like if this game was remade with modern graphics, had a couple more towns and dungeons, it would be able to stand on its own design legs against any Dark Souls game any day of the week. Well, except Brainlord has a bit of a story. It isn't a complete surprise to find out the same publisher and developer combo also made the 7th Sega game, which is one of the most difficult RPGs on the Super Nintendo, and it's one of the only games I know of that actually cranked up the difficulty for the North American release, although I think that was a bug. It seems a bit strange to me that Brainlord came out after 7th Sega, when 7th Sega really expanded on a lot of ideas that Brainlord had, and I wouldn't be surprised to find out that Brainlord was developed first. I'll probably get to talking about this game eventually, don't worry. So that's our moderately deep look at what I would consider a hidden gem that is Brainlord. Should you take a couple days and experience the world that Brainlord offers? I would say so. If you're interested in game design, you can learn a lot from this game. The story's not going to change your life, but it does have a certain charm that might make you smile a couple times. The gameplay's solid, and it doesn't really feel like a chore, and it's not a super long game either, so you can beat it in a couple days. All things considered, I'd say it's worth your time. Hi, if you got to the end of my video, you must have liked it, so please subscribe to my channel, share the video, and comment to become a cool kid. Don't you want to be cool? Of course you do. Do it right now. Also, check out my website, videogamestutor.com, for information about game programming, game design, as well as my tutor services.